Welcome, Mr. Beach. Or is that Bond? I'm a little confused.
Here's where MI6 operative James Bond receives his license to kill and a lot of gadgets from Sony. It's a film that attempted to modernise the character while also going back to the very first Bond novel by Ian Fleming, Casino Royale. No, not that one.
I would ask you if you could remain emotionally detached.
Casino Royale, the good one.
You don't think this is a very good plan, do you?
So there is a plan.
At some point, it was inevitable that the official James Bond movie series would go back to the only Fleming novel that Eon Productions had not yet adapted into a movie, or at the very least repurposed the title to use on an original plot. They have to date also not made a film out of my unproduced, unofficial and unprofessional Bond story, a rollicking yarn where James Bond has to stop a golden nuclear bomb filled with diamonds from exploding in Sherwood Forest. The studio called the script too derivative, riddled with grammatical errors and historical inaccuracies. I mean, how was I to know France was an actual country? So it's being picked up by Netflix.
Are you going to take this or make me wait?
Certainly, sir.
Ian Fleming's novel Casino Royale was first published in 1953 and introduced the character of James Bond, a British spy who didn't come off sounding like a character from P.G. Wodehouse.
Yes, well, we won't go into the ethics of the thing. Eavesdropping, some people might call it, a bit un-English.
The book was a modest success at the time, leading to many other books, but film and television producers saw the potential, and Fleming sold the rights to the novel pretty cheaply.
Well, it's 14,500,000. It's up to you, Monsieur Bond.
And pretty soon, in 1954, there was a live presentation on American television. Producer Gregory Ratoff had the film rights and had written the script, but couldn't get the financing together. Agent Charles K. Feldman ended up with the movie rights and would go on to produce the disastrous 1967 film version, which was set up as a spoof of James Bond, but one that was able to use official characters and situations from Fleming's novel.
Welcome to the James Bond 007 Training School.
The 1967 Casino Royale film would be silly, stupid and over the top, like a border collie trying to round up your sheepskin coat. After Feldman's death, the rights to a Casino Royale film reverted to United Artists, with whom he'd had a production deal, and Columbia Pictures, who made the 1967 film. This meant that neither studio could remake the film without the other.
This is me in character, pissed off because you're losing so fast we won't be here past midnight. Oddly, my character's feelings mirror my own.
In the mid-90s, Kevin McClory, who'd had the rights to Thunderball and exercised them in the 80s to remake the story as Never Say Never Again, had signed a deal with Columbia Studios to make their own competing series of James Bond films. A court case ensued, and as part of the settlement, the producers of the official Bond series, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, would end up with the film rights to Casino Royale. There was also my attempt to make a third competing Bond series based on my unofficial Bond short, The Gold Kill Diamond Die Day, but financing was difficult to come by after the test footage we shot in Dubai was deemed unsatisfactory. They said the Himalayan avalanche scene just didn't work as well without snow or the Himalayas.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
In 2002, Die Another Day had become the highest grossing Bond film released to date, yet had managed to annoy almost everybody. The Bond films had become too bloated and needed to come down to earth. There was also the idea of a smaller scale spin-off starring Halle Berry as Jinx. A script was produced that everybody liked, but since it was more grounded than Die Another Day, a film that makes helium look heavy, everybody looked at each other and thought, hey, why the hell don't we do a Bond movie like this? And while we're at it, why don't we do Casino Royale? Casino Royale, the book, is all about James Bond trying to take down the villainous Le Chiffre playing a card game, namely Baccarat. Baccarat, or its variant Chemin de Fer, is what you most often saw Bond playing in a casino up until GoldenEye.
Whichever one has closest to 9 wins the game.
Of course, by the mid-2000s, poker had become the card game played by anybody not lounging around in a dinner jacket in a Monte Carlo casino. It also happened to be more appealing to US audiences and, more importantly, younger moviegoers. Casino Royale also has to make poker exciting to people who didn't play poker, and they'd also have to explain what's happening.
It's the tell. He's bluffing.
I personally don't know much about poker myself, which means in my non-produced Bond script, The Die with the Golden Kill, they play Magic the Gathering. That film was almost a go, but financing fell through late in the day after one of the potential backers looked at an online forum dedicated to Magic the Gathering.
So your mistake will be short-lived.
The other thing about Casino Royale, it was usually seen as Bond's first adventure. How he went from being some guy, James Bond, a lowly agent, and became 007. Pierce Brosnan, being a more seasoned Bond, wasn't really considered quite right for the role. Okay, then there was also the question of his agent making a play for a much bigger payday for his client. So it was time for a new Bond, a younger Bond and a more affordable Bond.
No.
A lot of the film's major action set pieces are all in the film's first half. A chase through a building site because free running was cool at the time, though decades later, I wonder how these guys' knees are holding up. Bond tails a bomb maker for hire with the idea of finding out who's commissioned the job. This leads to Bond causing a major diplomatic incident. Bond goes on holiday, which again leads to several murders and a major police incident at Miami airport. Bond is about as reliable as a broken watch, but it is a very expensive broken watch.
Rolex.
Amiga.
So, a scary dude has invested his money with shady banker Chiffre, who in turn has put it all in the stock market. He's shorting an airline company's stocks, basically betting heavily that the stock will tank. And to make sure that that happens, he's hired some folks to sabotage the company's new plane. Bond does what he does best, and he bollockses all of this up.
You think it's this man, Chiffre?
Which would explain how he could set up a high-stakes poker game at Casino Royale in Montenegro.
M assigns Bond the task of beating Chiffre and to offer him protection. Chiffre knows things. Chiefly, he always knows where his hanky is. En route to Casino Royale, Bond is joined by Treasury official Vesper Lind.
I'm the money.
Every penny of it.
When disapproval meets disdain, a meet-cute where the pair psychoanalyze each other while clearly sizing each other up.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the bet? 100,000?
This is where the film really sets itself apart from other Bond films, with a very large chunk of the film based around a card game. But it's a Bond movie, so whenever someone takes a toilet break, there's some action. First, Bond attacks the terrorist whose money Chiffre had lost gambling, and later on, Bond is poisoned and needs to restart his heart. I'm fairly certain that I could have used one of those gadgets the time my dog accidentally won an auction for a Ferrari 308. Bond is outplayed by Chiffre, and Vesper won't release any more funds. But then this fella offers to stake Bond. His name is Felix Leiter and happens to work for the CIA. If Bond beats Chiffre, they will get the arrest. Bond prevails, though Vesper is kidnapped, and after totaling a brand new Aston Martin, Bond is tortured by Chiffre.
Right a bit.
Chiffre is then killed by his own people, and then Bond ups and quits to go off with Vesper. Some people from the organisation that formerly counted Chiffre as one of their number show up to recover the money. And then there's a climactic battle in a sinking house. Again, it's a meet cute for a rom-com. You've got nailed. Vesper is killed. Apparently she was being blackmailed into helping after her boyfriend was kidnapped, but maybe she did a deal to save Bond. But either way, Bond is going back to work.
If you do need time.
Why should I need more time?
Job's done. The bitch is dead.
Then in the film's postscript,
Who is this? The name's Bond. James Bond.
so with the decision to make Casino Royale, there was the question as to who was going to be Bond. Pierce Brosnan's last film, Die Another Day, had printed more money than Uncle Reg did in his shed, but even so, Casino Royale was about Bond's first mission. So recasting the role of James Bond was not good news for any fan who just had a picture of Pierce Brosnan tattooed to their lower back. I mean, if they just told me a week earlier. One actor, Daniel Craig, was the front runner with the producers, but there was a question over whether he'd accept the role, while the director had preferred Henry Cavill, despite him being younger than they were looking for. In the end, Wilson and Broccoli got their man, Daniel Craig. He had the acting chops and he was about the right age, still in his mid-30s. He'd also been in a number of high-profile films where he played the very Bond-like gangster in Layer Cake. Of course, the internet was starting to be used by fans to express their displeasure at almost anything, especially the preposterous idea of James Bond with blonde hair. Oh, not to be allowed. Harumph. Hey, I remember the time I had too much spare time and I started collecting stickers.
I will be keeping my eye on our government's money and off your perfectly formed house.
You noticed.
Daniel Craig's Bond starts off at the very start of his time as a 00 agent as an arrogant, closed-off thug. By the end of the film, that's also how he portrays himself. But as anybody paying attention knows, that is no longer the case. The Bond of the Daniel Craig era would leave behind a trail of dead ex-lovers. But as we would see, the events of this film will leave a lasting impression on the character. Bond is a blunt instrument, a bull in a china shop, an unguided missile, a self-driving car in a fog, or a man on a mission to make mayhem. Bond starts off using brute force over brains to achieve his goals, which is much like fixing a loose pair of reading glasses with a hammer. Now that's one way to make a spectacle of yourself.
You're not my type.
Smart.
Single.
French actress Eva Green gives us a rather cool character. Vesper is not initially impressed by Bond, occasionally repulsed by the violence around him, but she falls for him. Or does she? Well, maybe she did, but it's too late. Eva Green would possibly make every other actress to play a Bond woman rethink their choices in life. The filmmakers were initially hesitant on casting Eva Green due to her accent, which Green worked hard to, well, if not lose it completely, at least made her English clipped enough to sound like a civil servant in the Department of Fisheries in their local amateur dramatic society production of Macbeth.
You know, I think I'll call that a Vespa.
Because of the bitter aftertaste.
Because once you've tasted it, that's all you want to drink.
Mads Mikkelsen brought to life a totally different type of villain. His dead eye, inhaler and weeping tear duct gave him some character for a fella who really tried hard to hide his tell. Of course, he's a totally selfish character whose business went south and is quite desperate by the end of the movie. He's also one of the few Bond villains to have been taken care of by his own people, whoever they end up being.
Did you ever ask yourself why you weren't killed that night?
Judi Dench returns as M, utterly exasperated with her newly promoted underling. For her, Bond is like a smoke detector placed above a toaster, an utter pain.
I give him 00 status and he celebrates by shooting up an embassy. Is the man deranged?
And the film introduces Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter, a CIA man who, like Bond, will often be at odds with his bosses.
Does it look like we need the money?
Bond also has another ally, Mathis, played by Giancarlo Giannini, who of course will be screwed over by James Bond multiple times.
It's amazing what you can do with Photoshop these days, isn't it?
Casino Royale would see the return of GoldenEye director Martin Campbell. With a decade separating the two pictures, Casino Royale again feels very different from previous Bonds. After the ridiculousness of Die Another Day, all concerned wanted a more grounded Bond. While there are still death-defying action sequences, what you see on screen at least feels like it's possible that it might happen. This is the first Bond movie to be clearly influenced by the action in The Bourne Identity.
3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quinoa lily, shake it over rice, and then add a thin slice of lemon peel.
Yes, sir.
Like any long-running franchise, some fans will have their favourites and less favourites, and then there will be others who will draw an imaginary line on a calendar and not watch anything made after a certain arbitrary date, which is different for every person. But more importantly, they must tell you at every opportunity, whether relevant or not, how they won't watch anything after that date. Bless. I grew up with Roger Moore as Bond and love his goofy, stylised version of a spy. Yet I also heavily enjoyed the Daniel Craig films for their blend of grounded action and a deeper look at Bond's own character. The Craig era would break with traditions in how things in the films were presented. The gun barrel logo in this film is a transition to the main titles. The famous James Bond theme isn't heard to the very end of the film, a conscious decision. This is the first of this branch of Bond. He'll only be the James Bond we know at the end of this film. Meanwhile, the changes in this film have sent some fans off washing their hands 15 times in the last hour. Casino Royale, while it wasn't originally conceived as such, would have more storyline threads explicitly continuing from film to film. The Craig era would end up being a self-contained side series, much in the way companies like Marvel reboot their characters every now and then for a fresh start. Casino Royale would push the envelope in terms of examining the character of James Bond.
And you're Miss Stephanie Broadchester, yeah?
I am not.
You're gonna have to trust me on this.
In the 90s, there were legal shenanigans with Columbia and its parent Sony, where they tried to launch a competing Bond franchise. Bond co-owners MGM were bought by Sony, who owned Columbia, and it was that company that would distribute the next few Bond movies. Untangling MGM's ownership history is more complicated than trying to unravel who discovered fire. Was it Cal or was it Zog?
I don't think I'll never find out what that is.
Now I'm going to talk about product placement, which in the 90s the Bond films had become infamous for. It's a Bond film, so there's a watch.
Amiga.
Beautiful.
And then of course there's the car, the Aston Martin DBS, which is a fine looking car which Bond totals within about 30 seconds of driving off. There's a moose test if ever there was one, but I'd go with a gazelle test, much more fitting in this case. Now that Sony was the distributor, oh boy, the company was at the time spearheading its new format Blu-ray, and Casino Royale would end up being a big part of that push. I mean, it was the first Blu-ray I personally owned before I even had something capable of playing it. Sony would lean on Daniel Craig's Bond to sell its HD Bravia televisions for a time, but that was outside of the movie. In the movie, Sony logos were everywhere. This is the main reason that I wrote a third Bond script, in the hope that Sony would pick up James Bond buys a Sony PlayStation, 2 controllers and 6 first-party games, download code in a box. Again, the backers did what it said on their business cards and backed out.
Then you've learnt your lesson.
This film did keep one of the book's signature scenes, where Bond is stripped naked and his genitals tortured. Here they use a knotted rope, which is not branded Sony. And in the book, it's a carpet beater, also not branded Sony. It's an actual carpet beater, not some meta commentary on Bond's manscaping. David Arnold again provided a fine score, mixing the title song into the orchestral music, and Arnold resists the temptation to use the Bond theme until the very end. Chris Cornell's song from the main titles, the rock-infused You Know My Name, wasn't a cultural phenomenon on the level of songs like Goldfinger or Nobody Does It Better, but it was easily one of the best Bond themes in decades. It grows on you like a lichen dinner jacket if you lay down in your garden for too long. Casino Royale was a return to form for Bond. I like humour. This film has almost none, but then I still really like this film. And Daniel Craig as Bond. I like the fact that he feels like the guy in Fleming's book. He also feels a bit like Connery and a bit like Brosnan, yet at the same time brings something new to the table.
How did he die? Your contact? Not well.
If you ask what's the name of both the best James Bond film and the worst James Bond film, and you of course answered Casino Royale, then there aren't going to be too many people who disagree. Also, the joke doesn't work if I say what the actual worst film is, and that's Die Another Day. Casino Royale was a major hit when it was released in 2006, costing only a little more than Die Another Day, yet making a hell of a lot more money. The temptation, of course, would be just to churn out a quickie sequel and strike while the iron was hot. Which is exactly what happened when in 2008, Quantum of Solace popped up. Now that's a movie that's nowhere near as bad as you remember it.
But I won't consider myself to be in trouble until I start weeping blood.
But it's also nowhere near as good as Casino Royale. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
It's tailored.
I sized you up the moment we met.